I'm Tim Perkin. I will be discussing a bill presented to the Senate that, if passed, would ban many types of dark patterns, with the question, should we ban dark patterns by law? First, some background information about the bill. This bill is the Deceptive Experiences to Online Users Reduction Act, or the DETOUR Act for short. It was introduced to the Senate on the 9th of April 2019 by Virginia Democratic Senator Mark Warner, and it was sponsored by Senator Deb Fischer, a Republican from Nevada. So it's a bipartisan bill with the stated purpose, quote, to prohibit the usage of exploitative and deceptive practices by large online operators and to promote consumer welfare in the use of behavioral research by such providers. What this bill does is it targets dark patterns and behavioral research conducted by large online operators for profit via the FTC and imposed self-regulation of industry. Now, this bill does not apply to all online service providers. Instead, it only provides to what the bill defines as a large online operator, which is an operator which provides an online service which has more than 100,000 authenticated users of the service in 30 days. So that eliminates most websites. However, most web traffic does go through the services that would be impacted by this bill, and most websites that we spend a lot of our time on would be affected by this bill if it were to pass. What this bill does is it prohibits a certain number of design choices which could be classified as dark patterns. So it bans designing a user interface to impede the free choice of the user. The bill says that it is prohibited for a large online operator to manipulate user interface, quote, for the purpose or substantial effect of obscuring, subverting, or impairing user autonomy, decision-making, or choice to obtain consent or user data. It also prohibits subdividing consumers into research groups for behavioral or psychological experiments without informed consent of each user involved. It also has a special prohibition for user interfaces that will be used by minors under the age of 13. It says that it prohibits user interface design which cultivates compulsive usage of the online service by children. And this explicitly includes autoplay video features. So this is specifically targeting YouTube's user interface, claiming that that feature leads to compulsive usage by minors and should not be allowed. This bill also requires that large online operators do a few things. It first requires regular disclosures of any behavioral or psychological experiments conducted for the sake of profit. And then it also requires that these large online operators form their own transparent, independent review boards, which would register with the FTC for any such research and also for user interface design in order to self-enforce compliance. This bill is designed such that the majority of enforcement would be self-enforced by these large online service providers, but then if there were major infractions that were not being accounted for, the FTC could step in and enforce its rules about these dark patterns and research goals. Now, much of the way that this bill would actually be implemented is left to the decisions of the FTC and to the independent review boards which would be established, but there are a few guidelines about what kind of rules should be implemented to make sure that these companies are not in violation of the bill. This includes creating bright line distinctions and clear no-goes for the specific kind of services that each service provider is creating. But it also has a clause specifying that independent review boards should specify safe harbors of behavior that is protected and would not be considered infracting. These are suggestions for these independent review boards and the FTC. But the three which are specified in the bill are that it would not be forbidden to make de minimis user interface changes in order to meet user preferences in a way that is not done to obtain user consent or user data. Also, it would not prohibit using algorithms or data outputs that are outside the control of the large online operator. And finally, it allows some default settings to be applied to user profiles without explicit consent, provided that those default settings protect privacy, with a quote, establishing default settings that provide enhanced privacy protection to users or otherwise enhance their autonomy and decision-making ability. So the current status of this bill is that it's stalled. No official action has been taken since it was introduced in the Senate last April. This bill, however, has gotten some media attention, and it's been officially endorsed by Microsoft and Mozilla. But the only official development since its introduction was Senator Amy Klobuchar co-sponsoring the bill in January of this year. So the bill in its current state is likely dead. So when we discuss the ideas in this bill, we're really talking about possible future legislation for regulating dark patterns and also psychological or behavioral experiments done on users of large online services. So this brings us to a few questions. First, ought the government ban dark patterns by force? Are dark patterns a kind of behavior by these large online service providers that should be completely prohibited by the government federally? Second, do the definitions of dark patterns and informed consent correctly distinguish between persuasion and deception? Or would this bill possibly lead to prohibiting some behaviors which should not be prohibited? Or does it not go far enough and allow some dark patterns that should be prohibited? Is self-regulation the right approach to regulating dark patterns? Or should we expect a more direct approach? Or perhaps is it incorrect for the government to force companies to spend their resources to self-regulate when perhaps the government ought to be performing these kinds of regulations more directly? And finally, are the rules regarding cultivating compulsive behavior in minors appropriate? Thank you.